me, right?
Yep, I can just add you back in. Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, I think we might be live now. I'm sorry, everybody, that we're starting a couple minutes late here. We've been having some technology challenges, and unfortunately, technology is not my forte, so I apologize because this is totally my fault. We have one more speaker, Marsha, who's going to be joining us. She's just getting things figured out on her end, and I will add her in once I see her appear here. So thank you, Milene and Siobhan, for coming and hanging out today. And thank you to Marsha, who's going to be here soon too. You will see somebody named Tamber in the comments who is a Holist weight wellness strategy coach. And so if anybody does decide they want to learn more about Holist, then she's going to be your girl. And you can use a hashtag tell me more if you want to chat with her at all. I love it when people use the hashtag live when they watch this, or if you come back and you watch the replay, if you can use the hashtag replay. And certainly if you can give us some hearts on the Facebook feed, that's nice too. It just helps more people to see this stuff. So it's all part of Facebook's algorithms and getting your stuff visible to different people. So, okay. So, I've brought these two wonderful ladies here today so that we can talk about some scientific and some sustainable and some really no gimmicky approaches to weight wellness. And for me, like I really like to stress talking about weight wellness because I think this is a more inclusive term that sort of welcomes talking about body image and self-esteem and things that many people struggle with, whether or not they're struggling with obesity or overweight. And, you know, when I think back in my journey, even when I was at my fittest, I really had a lot of trouble with my body and my body image. And that's where the mindset piece has been so important to me, you know, still not even being where I want to be on my weight journey. My relationship with myself is so much better because I have done this work. And so, yes, I just want to say that, you know, we use this terminology to be very inclusive of anybody who wants to talk about anything pertaining to their weight and their wellness and their physical wellness, right? And how they feel about themselves. So, basically, I do these talks because I want to have some fun. I'm connected with a lot of really amazing women, and I always learn stuff every time I'm going to bring Marsha in here now. She's made it. Awesome. Hi, Marsha.
Hi. Sorry, it took me a while to figure it out.
No, it's all good. StreamYard is a little bit picky sometimes. So, I just want to say really that I open this conversation up to anybody really who wants to talk about weight. So I use this with my patients. I have these conversations with my friends. I use this stuff myself. I think all of these women that you see here will say that that is very much the same for them in their lives as well. And I think that that's why, you know, we're all here having this conversation really just to make this for everyone. You're going to see that we all work with people in our own ways, but really this information is applicable and valuable to everyone. So I am just going to ask these beautiful ladies to spend a couple minutes introducing themselves. I think just for the sake of us not all talking at once, I'll maybe just have us go around. So Milene, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Milene Argo. I'm an internist in Commerce, Georgia, outside of Athens. And I discovered this work about 3 years ago. And in my quest to lose weight, I had gained and lost the same weight multiple times, had been overweight about 20 years, ended up finding life coaching and found a new way to lose weight by coming up with a protocol, eating healthy, and ended up figuring out that the food was never the problem. It was really learning to deal with my emotions. Ended up losing about 80 pounds, have kept it off now for 3 years, and am into life coaching now as a result, and helping other people connect with the reasons why they're losing weight, in addition to helping them create the lives that they desire.
That is so incredible. I mean, can we just 80 pounds? You're going to hear from a lot of women who've lost a lot of weight in this talk, and it's pretty freaking awesome. So yes, I love that. Milene said to me a few weeks ago when we first met that she that it was never about the food. And I just love that so much, because so often we think it's about the food, right? I also love this because as I've been doing this work in coaching and connecting with women, I am so connected with so many women in the US. And today, Milene is the only woman from the US, and the rest of the speakers are Canadian. So it's kind of fun for me to have the Canadian girl here representing today. So Siobhan, tell us about what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Siobhan Key, and I have a podcast called Weight Solutions for Physicians. So I help physicians with stress and binge eating. And like Milene said, it's not about the food. We're trained to focus on the food and think about what diet we need, but we miss such a huge piece of what's really going on when we have weight issues or eating issues, when we just focus there. I'm a family physician and an obesity medicine physician. And I've had my own weight journey where for years, starting kind of in probably third year medical school is when it really started, and couldn't figure out why I had these eating behaviors that I knew weren't healthy and I knew I shouldn't be doing. And yet I kept doing, and they felt so compelling. And that's partly why I ended up doing obesity medicine and getting interested in it, was try to find answers. And I found some answers, and I think it does matter what we eat, and food does have an influence on how our brains approach food, but it wasn't the full answer. So ultimately, that's where I found the life coaching tools and became a certified life coach. And it's more the life coaching tools that I think make that difference about, going from knowing what we should eat or what we want to eat, to how to get ourselves to do that consistently, even during busy weeks, even when we're on call, even when we're really frustrated at things, to still eat that way consistently. That's the key, and that's the mindset stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Siobhan, for doing what you're doing for female physicians. It's amazing. Siobhan has an awesome podcast that she didn't speak about, but if you haven't heard it yet, you really need to jump on. I want to make sure I get it right. So you say the title, Siobhan.
It's Weight Solutions for Physicians.
That's what I thought. I just didn't want to say it wrong. Okay,
into iTunes, there's a lot of different ones.
Right. So Marsha, tell us about what brought you to this work and your story.
Sure. So I'm also a family physician, and I also practice obesity medicine 1 day a week. And I'm also a graduate of the American Board of Obesity Medicine, which I did also to try and get some answers because I was struggling with my own weight journey. So I do try to incorporate a lot of this work in my practice and personally as well, because I find that that's been the thing that has kept the weight off for me. And I approached things initially the same way Siobhan did, which was thinking about what the food was doing and what the food did to my mindset. But I was so focused on the food initially that I didn't see it in terms of the mindset until way after. So I was one of those lucky people that lost weight just focusing on the food. But then the same thing happened to me, as a lot of people, is the weight started creeping back up because I was missing that whole mindset piece that I discovered with the life coaching tools. And so now I use them a lot more in practice, both in family medicine and in obesity medicine, because I find that it's a really perfect extension of ACT therapy and CBT therapy. And it's this kind of stuff that we do every day. So in terms of I needed my coffee. In terms of my weight journey, so I had gained a lot of weight during residency and during a couple of stressful times in my life, and long distance relationships and a whole bunch of other things. And then it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But eventually, once I figured out that it was my mindset and it was the fact that I hadn't really found a way to cope and deal with my emotions using tools from the life coaching model, it became a struggle to figure that out. But once I did, the weight just started coming off, and it didn't, all the things that I was doing in terms of healthy habits were definitely helping, but it was the mindset that did it.
I just want to mention, we lost Milene for a minute, but she's going to come back. She's just trying to switch over to a different device. So I'll just share a little bit about my own journey. So I'm a family physician as well. I actually got to life coaching because I was going through my own journey with burnout, and that is the primary focus of my life coaching work. But along the way, I've always been passionate about weight, wellness, and this body image piece because I had struggled with this so much myself that I think I found myself driven to work in this sphere a little bit because I could see this overlap of so many of the things that I was working on with my mindset that were driving me to burnout were the very same beliefs about myself that had driven me to overeat and to be an emotional eater. And so when I was pregnant in 2018, I gained about 75 pounds, and I've now lost close to 45 of those. I still have a little ways to go to get back to, my very, very fittest when I was an obstacle course racer. And I don't know if I even necessarily want to be there anymore now, right? Because so much of that relationship with myself has changed. And I think that redefines some of our goals sometimes too, in terms of what we want, right? What really is health for us, what feels good, because sometimes the certain weight goal that we want when we think about weight loss, we have no idea what it feels like to be there and maintain that. And we don't even know if that's what we really want, right? And so I've become super, passionate about extending some of my work to this. And that's what made me partner with Holist. And my girl Heather Hammerstead couldn't be here today, but she's, Holist is her baby. And so I've had a lot of fun just starting working with her. I just want to share a quote. I love Brene Brown. I've shared her work here before, and I just want to share this quote because I think this is really the heart of the matter when we talk about our mindset around weight loss, I should say. She says, "We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be seen." And so, I think we often spend a lot of time hiding from ourselves in many ways. And I think we don't want to look at the ugly truth of what we believe about ourselves, but yet it's the very thing that's creating the behaviors that we're doing that lead us to not look after our body in a healthy way. And so I firmly believe that what has changed for me phenomenally in my life has been when I have spoken my truth and I have shared my story and I have reached out to other people and I have connected and I have taken down those walls of isolation and realized that I'm not alone, that has helped me to make progress in my life and to see myself in a different light, to value myself. And I think in doing that, that has really brought a lot of strength to me in my journey. I have, a sisterhood that I can lean on when I'm struggling, but I also now know how to lean on myself too, which is what has been so different for me in my journey. So I wrote a post recently on my Facebook about feeling like mindset really is the missing link in terms of sustainable and permanent change when it comes to weight wellness. It's not something sexy. It's not something you can buy and, apply and, overnight, right? It takes time to do this work. And I think that's what all of us will probably all agree upon, right? And it's work you really do have to intentionally practice doing every day. Brooke Castillo at the Life Coach School says this, that you cannot hate yourself thin. And I think that's really kind of the essence of it, really, right? Is that we so often hate what we are. And then it's like, how are we going to make any change from that place, right? I think the lesson here is that we need to cultivate the feelings we think we're going to have about ourselves when we lose weight. We need to cultivate those things for ourselves now to have fuel to get to where we need to go. I'm interested, Siobhan and Marsha, what you two think of that.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think hating yourself, it even does the opposite. Like we try to hate ourselves thin, that, okay, I'm just going to like myself better when I'm a better size, different weight, different shape, different skin, different, meaning like floppiness of skin, different, abdomen, all that stuff that we get so focused on. And yet all those negative thoughts that we have throughout the day, because when you're disliking your body the way it is, it's like this background noise usually, where you might not even be aware of it the whole day, but it's like there constantly. And that creates that negative emotion. Like you just feel kind of defeated. You feel down. And from that space, it actually, I think, drives weight gain rather than even weight loss. So if you say, okay, because when we're in that space too, when we want to lose weight, we often go the most restrictive, right? Like our brains are so black and white that we're like, okay, I want to lose weight. So it's going to have to be super restrictive, super perfect. And we try to do that from a place of not liking ourselves. And so it feels horrible and it feels like deprivation. It feels like we're hanging on like for dear life just to get some days in. And then our brains don't like that. So in very short order, we end up eating something we didn't plan. We eat something that's not on this super restrictive plan we created for ourselves. And then we hate ourselves for it. We beat ourselves up and it becomes a cycle and it just keeps going and going. So I really think, it's even to stabilize your weight, you need to work on just liking yourself and owning your decisions as just decisions, just choices, and not get into that beating ourselves up. I like to think, because we do this as physicians particularly, we do this in our bodies, but we do it in every single other aspect of our lives. Like, we do it in work, we do it in parenting, like in every aspect of our lives. Most of the people I work with feel like they're not measuring up. And if you think of the wasted energy that we collectively are spending on all this beating ourselves up, and if we could just reduce it even by 25%, imagine the stuff we would do. Like we're amazing people that have major skills, and yet our brains spend so much time doubting it.
My gosh, I talk about that all the time, right? It's like brain bandwidth, right? So much of it gets focused on these negative thoughts that we have about ourselves, and then we can't use our brain to solve problems, right? We can't use our brain to think about things in new ways. And I think we it's like we blunt what we're even capable of when we're stuck in that kind of mindset. Milene, I just want to fill you in because I know you were trying to get on from your computer. I'm sorry, StreamYard is being a pain for you today. We were just talking about, really what I think what has solidified this mindset piece for us and being maybe the missing ingredient for weight loss transformation, or even just the idea of weight wellness. So I'm interested in if Marsha, you or Milene have anything you want to add to that piece, or share your own kind of personal take on this.
Sure, I can add. So I would echo what Siobhan said. And I think when people focus on a specific body image issue or a specific weight and not on the mindset, even if they make it to whatever that goal they've set for themselves is, they're not necessarily going to feel happy about being there. There's always going to be the next thing, the next carrot that they're aiming for. And then they don't ever really get to that point where they feel good in their own skin. So even though they've thought that weight issue that they were trying to solve was going to get better when X, Y, and Z happens, if that's not what they're doing in terms of their mindset, and their mindset doesn't accidentally catch up, then you're stuck in the same spot mentally as you were prior to starting. And then sometimes the weight comes back on, or sometimes some other health habits fall off the wayside. And so I think focusing on the mindset is what makes that happen more successfully.
Milene, what do you think?
I think, for me, wanting to lose weight, and I think for most individuals, they want to lose weight for the way they think it's going to make them feel. And what's really powerful is that you can claim that now, and you can lose weight. And I think I'd heard Siobhan talk about this. You can generate those emotions now of love and compassion towards yourself and curiosity as to, why is it that I decide that I'm going to eat healthy, but then I'm not sticking with it. And when in that decision, and when you fall off of the thought that you're going to eat healthy and you're not doing it, how do you have curiosity and love and compassion for yourself to create the results that you want? I think every other time I had lost weight, and I had become very much an expert dieter. I could get off 20, 30, 40 pounds. And all of a sudden, overnight, it was like someone flipped a switch. It's like I couldn't generate the motivation anymore. It's like the willpower had just left me. Whereas learning to lose weight from a place of loving myself, respecting myself, having love, curiosity was so much more powerful than the old way of losing weight. And that was of belittling myself, telling myself I wasn't good enough. If only I could fit into a size X, then everything would be okay. So I think it's definitely the mindset that once you change that mindset and you reach for how you want to feel now instead of waiting until you're thinner, because as one of you guys said, that carrot keeps moving, right? It's one goal and then it's another and it's another, and just figuring out, hey, you know what? I'm worthy just as I am. And from that place of worthiness, then losing weight from that place instead of trying to lose weight to make yourself more worthy, because it doesn't work.
And I think, with the body image stuff, right? And we picture what our body will look like when we've lost significant amounts of weight. The reality of what a body looks like when it's lost significant amounts of weight doesn't always match what we picture. Like, skin is a real issue, and it doesn't necessarily go away with weight loss. And so if you still have that mindset, all that'll happen is your brain will just find new things to beat yourself up about. Like, it might not have the same things, but if it's used to finding the things that are wrong with your body, it will just keep finding them no matter what weight you get to. And I see that lots in my obesity medicine practice and with coaching, where people have lost large amounts of weight, but there's still that identity that it's not quite enough, or their body's not there. And like what Milene's saying is, you don't have to wait to do that work until you've lost the weight. You should be doing it while you're losing the weight. So when you get there, you can be okay with it, no matter what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think it's so important to acknowledge too that, what we think about, right? So often when we think about weight loss is we think about what we're seeing perpetuated in the media as being like the ideal body, right? And then yet we don't know. And I think the more I do this work in imposter syndrome and some of these other spheres that I'm working in, I realize that we don't recognize the struggle or what it took for somebody else to get to that point, right? And we don't realize that they may not even feel happy or satisfied or well in their body or any of those things, right? And so I think it's, I think the point really is that this is a construct that's created in our brain, right? And so we need to be intentional of making sure that we're creating that for ourselves along the way as we're working towards our weight loss journey. So I'm just wondering if I'm envisioning people listening to this, and if they're only hearing this for the first time, they're maybe saying, okay, this all sounds great, you lovely ladies, but how do I do this? Like, what do I do? So could you share maybe like one or two practical tips that you have for anybody listening on how to start tackling this beast of mindset? I want to just kind of go around. Maybe Siobhan, we'll start with you, and then Marsha, and then Milene.
I think the biggest, what I always tell people to start is you have to go after this with an approach of essentially it's a science experiment that you're doing and you're figuring it out. So versus a classic diet, you go after it. All I have to do is follow this plan that somebody else created for me. And if I can be perfect, it will be fine. So when you're doing it with mindset, you're a scientist and you're figuring out what's going to work for you in your life. And that means always taking an approach of compassionate curiosity. So no matter what happens, because perfection does not exist. And even those of us like that have lost and are maintaining a lot of weight and do this regularly, we're still not perfect. I'm not perfect. Like, I still make food choices that I know don't work that well for my body. But the difference is when I do it, instead of thinking I shouldn't have done that, I can't believe I did that again, here I go again, which are all very common thoughts that people have when they feel like they're eating off plan. I think, okay, this is a choice I'm making, and I can see that I'm making this choice because of this emotion. Like, I'm choosing to eat this food instead of dealing with an emotion right now. but that, next time, like I'll figure it out and I'll deal with it next time, basically. And that takes a lot of compassion for yourself, but it is the fastest way to get back on track. So when we look at it, if we go through the kind of classic would be we eat off plan, we think those thoughts like, I can't believe that I did that, here I go again. That makes you feel defeated. It makes you feel like a failure. There's a lot of other negative, makes you feel guilty, shame, all those sorts of emotions. What happens when we're feeling those emotions is we are far more likely to continue eating off plan. We're far more likely to continue to eat the food because we feel so bad, and now we have to try to deal with those negative emotions. And if you haven't built other skills, food is your easiest way of dealing with it. Versus, like I said, what if you can be compassionate and go, okay, that was a choice. I made a choice to eat off plan. It's going to just give you a much more neutral emotion. And feeling neutral about food choices, I think, is a very powerful place to be. Because from a neutral spot, your next choice might be very different. Or it might be the same, but you're going to be far more likely to get back onto your plan than if you're going down the spiral of, I can't believe I did that. And it just becomes this like repeating cycle. So compassion and curiosity. I wonder why I did that. What could I learn from this would be other questions. And I did this, like my biggest thing that I struggled with, like long after I was doing obesity medicine. And the reason why I kind of really got into the life coaching was Wendy's French fries. So like as soon as the day got stressful, my brain would be like, it's okay, like we'll go to Wendy's, we'll get some French fries. And it took me a long time to really figure out what that was. And it took a lot of that compassionate curiosity to be like, okay, here I am again, like what is going, or even in my day. And those thoughts started to come, okay, what's happening right now? Like, why are these thoughts here? It took a lot of that over and over, but I figured it out, and now it's not the same issue it was. But it took me years, because I didn't have these tools. It took me years of like almost constantly thinking about, how do I figure this out? How do I stop doing this? And it was the mindset stuff that made the difference.
Marsha, what do you think?
Usually I try to get the person, whoever it is, the patient, to pick their own goal. So if we use Siobhan's French fry example, so I ask them like something that they're struggling with. And if they tell me, oh, well, after a stressful day at work, I just go and get Wendy's French fries because it makes me feel better. I try to get them to find the emotion that it's linked with. So like to tie the emotion and the behavior together so that they can see, and if they don't know what that is, then that becomes their homework, to figure out like what's leading them to that health habit that they don't like, that they're struggling with, that they want to work on. And then once they figure out what the linkage is, then we can work on what to do about that emotion, and then going through this work that way. Because it feels a bit more organic than trying to show them like a life coaching model. It feels like it's more of like a SMART goal, like they're working on something specific. And then once they start seeing those ties, and then we can develop those ties together. And then there's more like compassion and curiosity for that individual person, because they can start to see and develop those skills for themselves.
Cool.
And then instead of beating themselves up about when they decide to go and get their Wendy's French fries, we talk about what led them there and how they felt about that and what they did moving forward, and just trying to link all of that circle together, and then figure out, is this a behavior that you want to change or is it not?
I think a really important part of when you're figuring out how your brain works is recognizing that our brains don't do anything that they don't think have value. That's a lot of don'ts. But our brain, all of our behaviors that we do, including behaviors related to food, our brain thinks there's value with that. So like for the Wendy's French fries, the value was it was a break in busy days. My brain thought it had no other choice to manage super busy days than having that moment. That was when my kids were pretty young too, so home was not a break. But that moment of quiet in the car where nobody could talk to me. And then, of course, the dopamine from the French fries, that the effect they would have on my brain also impacted it. So I find helpful to go, okay, what benefit am I getting from this behavior? It's very easy to think of all these behaviors as being bad, but to your brain, they're doing something. And if you don't figure that out, it's not going to be a lasting fix. Like if I were to just say, I'm just no longer eating Wendy's French fries, which I did a lot, and just really try to just stop eating Wendy's French fries, all that would do is I could use willpower to do to a certain level. But if before I had figured out why I wanted to eat those and what they were truly doing in my life, then ultimately I would end up back there because I hadn't replaced that need. I wasn't getting that break or dealing with the stress of my days in a different manner. And so ultimately my brain would be like, we have no choice. Like, you haven't managed this. We have built up a lot of stress. We just need to do this. And then it would feel so compelling and feel like I had no choice. And I would be right back there. But if you can figure out what any particular behavior is doing for you, you're going to be a lot further along, because then you can decide, okay, what would I do otherwise to get this benefit? And there's a lot of things that food does for us. Like our brains connect it to a lot of different needs in our life.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And yeah, I think that, really what Siobhan's talking about is the difference between willpower and us actually understanding what our neural networks are that we have now existing in our brain, right? Why is there such positive reward for this thing? And once we understand that, we actually have the opportunity to start to reprogram that network and train it to think a new thing. But it takes time and it takes intention. And so, one tip I would give women who are listening to anybody who's listening to this, I shouldn't say women, it's often women. no offense to any guys who happen to listen, because this is totally applicable to you too. But what I would say is that get out a piece of paper and write down everything that you can think of, add to it when something comes up, right? When you find yourself in that patterned behavior where you're about to go to eat that thing, that problem food for you, write down what's going on in your brain, because this is how we get to know it. We so often don't want to look at it, right? It's like we want to avoid it. We want to stuff it back in the closet and shut the door and pretend it's not there. But this is the key, like this is the secret sauce. And so if we do this, then what happens is that we start to understand and we can start to intentionally reprogram. Now, what I see coming up for a lot of women when this happens is that they then get into this internal tug of war with themselves. And so what happens is they know the thoughts that they think that trigger that urge to go and get that food and consume it, for instance, the Wendy's fries, right? And then they just think, why can't I just not think that anymore? It's almost that same willpower piece. As it's like, we just want to think, why can't I just not want that food anymore? Now we think, why can't I just think that thought anymore? And then we start to get frustrated and angry with ourselves, because we're like, we know why we do this, but why can't I stop doing that? So what I teach women to do is to let go of that rope. Like, just let go. Stop, stop doing this cycle where as soon as our brain offers us the thought or offers us the urge, that we look at it and we're like, there's something wrong with me because I still have that thought. Because we know it takes time. And if we look at our brain with a little bit of humor and a little bit of this curiosity and this compassion piece, and we just say, you know what, it's just automatic, right? It's just programming that exists there. And I'm working on changing that and rewriting that, right? But it's going to take time for me to do that. And so if I can be amused that, of course, like I'm under stress, of course, my brain is going to offer me this thought, then we can approach this in a way that we're not creating more of that negative emotion, which then triggers us even more into that loop that Siobhan was talking about, right? Instead, we get to this place where we're like, there goes my brain again. And we can almost approach it with humor, with a little bit of like humility, and I think just with this this idea that it's okay for our brain to not be perfect, right? It's totally okay. I just am seeing that there's a question from Sarah here, and I'd like to ask you guys what you think of this. I did forget to say that if anybody who is watching has questions, we can be interactive here. And so please do put them in the comments. And if you do come back and you watch the replay of this, feel free to post some questions, tag maybe one of us if you want, and we're happy to engage and keep having this conversation. Milene, you look like you're on your computer now. Did you get it working? Oh, we can hear you though.
You can't hear me.
Oh, now we can. Okay, good.
Oh,
So this
hear
is
me now?
This is what Sarah said. So she says, how else can I give myself dopamine without the negative consequence? For me, it's loud pop music in my earbuds. Oh, it wasn't really a question. It was sort of just sharing how else she does this. So she likes to listen to loud music in her earbuds to give her a break from the clinic sounds when she's getting herself into that mindset where she's feeling like, oh, I need to just go and grab food and go. Milene, I don't know how much of that conversation you caught, but we were speaking about, like, maybe, you know, what my question really was to everyone is, if you're just hearing about this for the first time, what are one or two practical tips that you can start to take to really just beginning to implement this mindset piece in your life? Because I think sometimes, you know, people get once we've been doing this for a while, people get the idea that we're like some kind of gurus that you know, special unicorns that just always think positively and never struggle with this stuff. And I guess that's the point of what I'm saying, right, in this whole tug of war, is that we're not, right? We still have those thoughts, but we have maybe begun to approach what our primitive brain offers us in a different light, and we're thinking about that differently at times. Anything you want to say that you would suggest to people to try to do when they're first starting this?
I think it's just really an awareness of what you're feeling. And that comes with time. I think in the moment, you know, I think our biggest teachers is the replay, you know, giving into like the Wendy's fries, like you guys talked about. And then after the fact, going back and trying to figure out, now, why did I do that? What was the emotion that I was feeling? Was it anxiety from the day? Just really trying to connect with what emotion it is that's driving our actions, and how do you solve for that? You know, between the stimulus and the response, there's a little bit of space. And as you get better at this work, that space gets bigger and bigger, and it gives you more time to where you feel like you have a little bit more control over your actions.
So I love how Sarah mentioned the loud pop music in her earbuds, and I'm just wondering, like, are there any other things that you guys are using yourselves that really helps you to interrupt that neural network and maybe find a different way of managing when you feel like you have this craving, or you're so compelled to eat? Like, is there anything that you guys are practicing yourselves that has really helped you? Anybody can feel free
to. Yeah, I can answer that. So for me, it's just the awareness of the urge, right? And I try to give it a name. So it's like, wow, isn't that interesting? With curiosity, my brain just told me that I needed ice cream. I wonder why that is. And then I can kind of question it from that standpoint. Sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes the next thing I know, I've already put the ice cream in a bowl and I'm eating it. But I think for me, key is recognizing when I'm having the urge and allowing the urge without answering it.
What I've found helpful is like same sort of thing, when if I get to the point where there's a very strong emotion and a very strong urge, like breathing into it. Essentially, I often think of this like when you're in a yoga pose that is a bit uncomfortable, and you just kind of, because your brain's response is, I need to get away from this, I need to get out of it, which would be to eat. And so if you can just breathe into it and try and relax into it, it helps and it'll go away. But what I found most powerful is if I can catch those emotions that lead to those urges at an earlier phase. So like for me, stress is like this kind of tightness in my chest. If I catch it at the earlier point of it, before I feel just so like completely overwhelmed, then I'm in a space where I can go, okay, what's going on? What am I thinking about right now that's making me feel stressed? And Maybe it's, work, like I'm behind and I have thoughts about being too far behind, or maybe it's the kids and I have thoughts of how they should have cleaned their room and they shouldn't have made the big mess, or they shouldn't have gotten slime on the carpet. Not real life examples at all. Thoughts like that if I can catch them before it's gone so far where I have such a strong emotional response that I have the food urge, and I can just go, okay, is that actually how I want to think about this? Or could I just shift how I'm thinking right now in the moment and think something like, there's plenty of time to get the work done? Or with the kids stuff, the thought I use a lot is, this is just exactly how it's supposed to be having 3 small kids. Sometimes slime gets on the carpet. Like, of course it does. And, if you just shift your thoughts just slightly like that, then the emotion stuff comes down and I don't necessarily get to that point where there's a really strong urge. Now that's kind of, it takes more skill and awareness, but I always think of it as like, I talk about an iceberg. So the food and the food urges are kind of the peak of the iceberg, but there's all this stuff underneath. And really doing this long term and doing the mindset is figuring out what's at the bottom of your iceberg, what's driving that food urge. And that earlier in this kind of the cascade that you can catch it, then it becomes quite simple to correct. And the urge never happens. And I think once you can figure those skills out, that's kind of the magic point. I'm not saying you'll never have food urges, because that's not realistic, but the amount that you have to deal with and that you have to do, like what Melene's talking about, go down really significantly when you kind of catch them at the source.
And that really is the beauty of doing this coaching work and working with a coach, right? Is that we so often don't see these things ourselves. And I think that that's what all of us here have worked with coaches to do this work. So, if you're listening to this and you're feeling discouraged, know that we all were not necessarily able to do this for ourselves right from the get-go, right? That we had people to help show us what was going on in our mind in order to start. Marsha, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think like for me, initially, it was really hard to figure out what I could replace that dopamine spike with. So for me, what I did was I went back kind of to like the source of where that was coming from, like backtracked it a little bit. So I usually found that I would have these food urges and wanting these dopamine spikes with food if I was having decision fatigue at the end of the day, when I hadn't planned out what I was going to eat, it wasn't prepared ahead of time. And so that's when I would go and just go off plan and then beat myself about it afterwards. So I figured, why not start at the beginning of all that? Why not schedule it? Why not think about what my meal plan is going to be for the week and plan it all out in terms of what I'm going to eat when in terms of my meals. And then that would probably decrease the urge for whatever thing that I'm trying to have at the end of the day, because of this decision fatigue of not wanting to make yet another decision at the end of the day when I've made thousands already. So that was super helpful to me. And then the other thing that was helpful was like also planning and scheduling the like trigger food. So if it's the bowl of ice cream, planning it out for like Friday night, I know that by the end of the week, I'm going to want something. So then planning it felt a bit better than going off plan without purpose. So when I was initially starting this work, I would plan for those things because emotionally it felt better at the time. And I didn't beat myself up for doing it because I made that conscious choice earlier in the week that it was going to happen. So those were the tips initially for me that really helped.
I love that you said that, because it really is a completely different thing in terms of our brain's neural network and programming. Actually planning when you're going to eat something and following through is totally different to your brain than when we give in to this urge, where our primitive brain is the thing that's driving this, right? It's using a higher functioning part of our brain when we have made decisions in advance about what we're going to eat, right? And this is really what a lot of this comes down to when we're looking at deprogramming the neural network that is driven by our primitive brain and not supervised by our higher functioning part of our brain. So yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. I'm going to add this one little thing that I think can be very helpful. Is I will actually share a picture of this little 1-minute meditation in the comments, but I use this brief 1-minute meditation. So when I find that I'm really kind of feeling this, this strong desire to just throw it all to the wind and, just eat whatever I want to eat, right? I'm overwhelmed by hunger. Maybe I didn't eat enough earlier in the day. I spend a few minutes and I just do this breathing exercise where you focus as you're breathing on something different for 15 seconds, right? And so the first one is breathing in and out through your nose and out through your mouth. Then you spend 15 seconds thinking about how you're just inhaling and feeling your lungs expand, and you're exhaling and you're letting go. And then you spend the last 30 seconds thinking about how, as you're inhaling, your body is getting, the next 15 seconds thinking about how your body is getting fuller, and then you're breathing out tension. And then the last one is you focus on feeling alive and awake and complete in this moment. And as you're breathing out, you focus on your muscles relaxing. And what I find for me is that usually shifts my emotional state very, very quickly out of whatever, negative emotion maybe that I was in that was triggering me to be in this place. And I can just make decisions so much better from that place than I can when I'm in the, at the peak of that negative emotion, perhaps, or that stress, or, that decision fatigue, like Marsha talked about. I'm wondering if you guys want to speak. I'm just being mindful of time here. I have a couple of questions from when I had posted earlier in the week asking if anybody had any questions. I want to make sure I leave you guys a few minutes too to talk about how you can be reached. But I'm wondering if any of you who are more knowledgeable than I am on the topic want to speak about just briefly about sort of the current status of research in terms of nutrition and body functions and hormones and these kind of things, just briefly to give people an idea of what's important to know when you're first starting out in terms of weight loss about your body. Siobhan or Marsha, do you maybe want to speak to that a little bit?
I can speak a bit about it.
I think there's a lot of emerging research on this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it very much depends on the person and their metabolism in terms of what the recommendations might be. And we talked a little bit about stress, and so stress hormones play a big role. So that's why people often talk about like managing your mind and your sleep, because those things can play a role in terms of weight. People talk a lot about like targets for exercise in terms of numbers, both for weight management and weight loss, and there's some science around that. And the numbers are quite high in terms of what the recommendation is for maintaining weight, like weight loss once you've already lost weight. So that tends not to be a focus I talk to people about because that number is like 300 plus, like vigorous minutes a week. Like it's pretty high if you're going to use that as a tool. And then in terms of other like metabolic things, like specifically related to like low carbohydrate diets or very low carbohydrate diets, there's some more evidence coming out about that with people with diabetes or with metabolic syndrome, and if they're looking to lose weight with those conditions, that can be a tool with the supervision of a doctor, that can be a tool that's useful for those people as long as it's safe for them. And then there's a lot of new evidence coming out specifically with like hormones and mood and mindset, but I don't know specifically more about that, but I haven't read any studies recently, but there is a lot more coming out specifically about that too.
And I think so through my journey in obesity medicine, I've used different diets. I think one thing to note is that nutritional research is a challenging field for research. Like to design good quality studies, it's really, really expensive. So we don't really have double-blinded, we don't have studies saying in a perfectly controlled environment which diet actually works better. Most of the research is done as retrospective studies, so they have flaws. So it's asking people, what did you eat, and then measuring things. And that makes it challenging to interpret, because then you're really, there's studies that show every diet is the right diet, and it's all about kind of who designed it and stuff. And I think you just have to decide what makes sense to you and what seems to work. So when I started doing obesity medicine 4.5 years ago, I was using like a low calorie diet and partial meal replacement diet, which does have evidence. But what I found with that is people could lose weight on it, but the maintaining weight was harder. Now, to be fair, I wasn't teaching all this mindset stuff at that point in my weight management program. but I shifted to doing a lower carbohydrate approach because of my understanding of the hormone insulin, and it made sense to me. Plus, personally, I had shifted and it made a difference. So insulin is a hormone in our body, and we think of it as managing our blood sugars, but it actually has other impacts. So when we have high insulin levels in our body, it makes it harder for our body to break down fat. Insulin kind of is a signal to your body that it needs to burn sugar as its predominant fuel, and it should not use fat because it's got to use the sugar, as well as any extra food energy that you eat. It needs to be stored as fat, is essentially what insulin does. And when they do research, people with extra weight, even if they're not diabetic, generally do have higher insulin levels than people who aren't overweight. And so eating to minimize insulin levels, I find, makes a difference. And this is speaking more from personal, clinical, anecdotal experience, but the people in my obesity medicine practice are able to lose the weight more easily, but also then maintain it. So like lower fat diets, there's a lot of research about what happens when you lose a significant amount of weight and the maintenance of it and how metabolically difficult that can be with metabolic rates and stuff. And there's only a little bit of research about, is that different with lower carb? It looks like it might be, but from clinical experience, I feel like it is. Like, the number of people in the program that are maintaining very large amounts of weight and not feeling that struggle with it is really quite different than when I was doing a lower carb partial meal replacement. So I think personally, and with the people I work with, doesn't mean you have to eat keto, but if you eat in a way that kind of minimizes your insulin response, I think it helps.
Awesome.
Yeah, and to add to that too, in terms of like insulin, like the number of times you eat per day spikes your insulin too. So then that sort of brings up the topic of like snacking or intermittent fasting. And I often talk to people about the number of times per day they eat too. So if they have issues with their insulin levels, then maybe being a grazer isn't the best tool for you. Maybe having specific meals every day, like 2-3 meals a day, or however that works out for you, is going to be a better tool for you than grazing, because that's going to keep your insulin levels high all the time.
Milene, did you have anything you wanted to add from either your clinical practice or just from doing this work yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you my disclaimer, and that's that I'm a doctor, but I'm not anybody's doctor who's watching. So if they have any specific questions about their body, they should definitely talk to their doctor. That being said, insulin definitely drives our weight set point. And we know that a key way of lowering that insulin level is to cut out flour and sugar. Why? Because they're very highly processed and they tend to really increase your insulin level. So in order to get those levels down, eliminating or considering, if this is something that you want to try to do, is to eliminate sugar, meaning the kind of sugar you add, like high fructose corn syrup and white table sugar, and sticking with more whole foods like you would on the outside of the grocery aisles, right? More fruits, more veggies, lean meats, cheeses, etc. Can really help drive that insulin level down. What they know is that as you drive those insulin level down, your hormones, your ghrelin and your leptin, seem to be more more balanced, and therefore, as a patient, what you end up feeling is more hunger and more fullness, and you become more in tune with your body. So, as Marsha said, that as you limit the times during the day that you're eating, that's another way to lower that insulin level, to give your body a chance for that insulin level to come down. I always say that snacking was invented for the snacking industry. Our bodies are perfectly made. We should be able to get from one meal to the next meal without having a snack. And oftentimes when you're feeling hungry between meals, sometimes it is emotional hunger and not true physical hunger. So just drinking some water can help get you through to that next meal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I think another piece of this too is that we've kind of evolved a bit in our society that we have this perception or belief that there's something bad about experiencing a little bit of hunger. And I think that, I think we as we've all been through this journey, we've started to realize that hunger is a sensation in our body, like along with all of these emotions that we're talking about, right? And learning how to live with a little bit of discomfort is actually part of this journey, right? And a pretty important piece. When I start working with my clients, I ask them all, every single one of them, we talk about what intentionally we want to think and, believe, and what are we going to feel to get to our end goal. And always I ask them, do you think you're going to need to feel some discomfort? Because if right from the get-go you can't see that you're going to need to be able to embrace some discomfort, you're going to struggle along the way, because this is part of the process, right? It's part of being a human being, in fact, and living a full life, is that this is going to come up for us. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, so I just want to ask you guys what you think about a couple of these things, because two lovely women wrote some comments for us that they were hoping we could speak to, and so I'm going to just share exactly what they said. So the first is, I feel like I've recently developed a very emotional relationship with food. I have always loved to eat, but recently events, birth of a third baby, COVID, quarantine, etc., have turned eating into a coping mechanism. I love to bake. My kids love to bake. We love to eat the treats, etc. I find I'm turning to treats, making, eating, or sharing them to bring me joy, but I'm also not feeling the best about myself lately. I think we've spoken to some of this, but I'm just wondering if anybody has anything directly that they'd like to respond to Jen with pertaining to this particular issue.
I think the biggest thing is just don't get into the trap of getting really wrapped up on the eating piece of it. Like, have compassion. And this is what I've talked about a lot during COVID, is of course our brains have turned to food in COVID. Like, we haven't experienced anything like this in our life, in our generation, right? And so our brains were like, what has happened to our life and what's going to happen to our life, and went into panic mode. So of course food was the easy, like, accessible solution. So for anybody who ended up eating more or developed new habits during COVID, or old habits came back, I think the biggest thing is just be compassionate about it. Recognize it's not about the food, like what we've talked about. It's not that the food suddenly became more appealing. It's just your brain trying to solve a problem. And food was the readily available solution. Doesn't mean it'll always be that way. You can start, as things are settling down, start to figure out what you really need. And that might be a lot of stuff, right? Like, if you're home with kids and kids are home all the time, maybe what you need is a break. Like, maybe you need to get out of the house because, there's a lot of different things that you might need. But the biggest mistake we do is we get focused on the food, and we just don't let the food piece go, and we miss what's underneath it. And if you miss what's underneath, then you can't actually correct it.
I agree. And the other thing,
I always say,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
The other added piece too is she mentioned that she really enjoyed baking with her kids, and her kids enjoyed baking. So if that's something that she doesn't want to do as much anymore, you could try doing something else, like cook a new recipe that maybe you haven't tried before and involve the kids with that. Like, get curious about some other aspects of food and experiment a bit more, because then it won't feel like deprivation, because you're still doing the same things that you would normally do with your kids. That would be like a tip if she wanted something to take away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always, I would just like to speak to her comment that I love food. When I have the thought I love food, it creates a lot of desire for me. I prefer to think I love people. And so oftentimes when you really think about what we're creating for ourselves, when we realize that food is meant to nourish our body and treats should be occasional. So if you go back and you try to decide, okay, I'm just going to do that a certain number of times per week. And like Siobhan said, that it's, of course, it's readily available food. We're in this very stressful time, recognizing that. And I think the first step is awareness, is that, what, maybe I'm eating too many sweets. Maybe we need to back that down and decide with our prefrontal cortex, how many times a week is this okay? And how do we come up with other activities that bring us joy?
Mm-hmm.
So great. Okay, I'm going to read the second one here in the interest of time. So this is from Jessica. She says, something I've been reflecting about more is how we can have goals related to fitness and nutrition. Example, leaning out or gaining muscle, or how we can focus on and monitor nutrition and foods we're eating without it becoming unhealthy in an emotional or psychological way. So she goes on to say, sometimes I found the more I focus on food, the more psychological and emotional it becomes. But it's a catch-22 because I've also found that it can be the opposite as well, that I've lessened my focus on my nutrition and I find I can feel worse all around, physically, emotionally, or psychologically, or I'm less able to meet my goals. What are the key factors in mindset that distinguish a focus on nutrition and it having positive effects on your emotional and psychological health versus a negative effect on your psychological and emotional well-being? Siobhan, do you want to start?
I just try not to always be the first person.
Oh, well, you know what? I figured for the sake of
totally go in the circle. You know what? I think the difference is the thoughts behind it. So you can have the same action, you can have following a certain meal plan, but the thought and your intention behind it is what's going to change the feeling of it. So it's hard not talking to somebody directly, but that description of just your brain becoming overly focused on the actions, my guess is the thought that's behind it is a little bit, like we talked about at the beginning, maybe coming from a place of dislike or frustration with yourself, versus you could decide that those actions, that meal plan, is the way that you care for yourself in the most loving way, and you're not going to get quite obsessed in the same way. So you can have the same set of actions and feel entirely different about them just based on how you think about it. And I think that's really important. Like, this is kind of the over-focused question, but same thing with the overly restricted, overly deprived questions, same thing you could have following the exact same meal plan, and it just comes down to what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing about thoughts definitely being connected to something like that, and having a positive reinforcement versus a negative reinforcement of the same action based on what thought that was coming from.
Yeah, and a good way to tell where it's coming from, if you're not sure, is to stop taking that action and see what comes up for you. If you're really feeling bad about yourself, then you know that maybe the place where that was coming from wasn't a good place. But if you still feel whole and worthy, even though you're not doing that action, then you know that maybe it was, that your motivator was more positive instead of negative.
I love that. I think what I hear when I listen to these words and I sort of think about this is that for some ways, I think, Jessica, what's coming up for you is that you think that the actions that you're doing is what's driving your feeling, right? When really what's changing in each of these situations is just the way we're thinking, the way you're thinking in this case, about yourself, right? And so that's why you can feel both negative emotion and positive emotion about the same situation, right? And that's why, when you say, like, sometimes I find it's a double-edged sword, it feels like that because we think it's the action that creates the way we feel, but really it's what we're thinking and believing about ourselves in that moment that's creating the feeling. And so the beautiful thing about this is that we actually can choose to practice this with intention in a way that's going to create the feeling that we want to have, and that's what's going to bring that connection and make the action come naturally from that place, right? It's like the difference between, paddling upstream and trying to willpower ourselves into doing something versus when we focus on this starting way upstream in terms of how we're going to solve the problem, right? And we think about intentionally how we want to think about this. Then what happens is that the emotion happens. The emotion then fuels the action, and it becomes more natural for us to take the actions that we want to take to get to where we want to be. And it feels less like paddling upstream. So I want to thank all of you for your time. We're a little over an hour here, so I feel like we should wrap up. But please, I'd like you to take a few minutes and just share, if you're willing to keep having this conversation with people, where you do your work, and maybe just who your audience is, and And then anybody who comes back and watches the replay, if you can give us some hearts, if you can give us a hashtag replay, or anybody that's here still, give us a hashtag live. We would love to have this reach as many people as possible. Okay, Siobhan, we'll start with you again.
Let's have a circle. I feel like we're in the Brady Bunch. But so, like I said, my business is Weight Solutions for Physicians. So you can find me at weightsolutionsforphysicians.ca. And the podcast, which has, if you're listening to this and this has been helpful, there's over 80 episodes now, and it talks about all this stuff. So the podcast is Weight Solutions for Physicians. It's on iTunes and all the other podcast platforms, free to listen to.
Marsha.
So you can find me at Calgary Metabolic Recovery Clinic, and the website is calgarymrc.ca.
Milene?
I'll go next. You can find me at the doctoringcoach.com, and my goal in life is to help practicing physicians in the exam room and beyond. So I don't really do any weight loss coaching, but I love talking about losing weight and love talking about mindset. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And, I'm just so proud of all of you, how you've done with your journeys. And, I certainly credit a lot of my success to Holist in teaching me many of these things. I was actually a client in Holist. I shared that when I did the write-up. And so that's part of the reason why I chose, when, I realized I was interested in doing this work as well, to work with Holist. And yes, so if anybody wants to know more about Holist or get on a strategy call, Tambra's here. She will help you out. She's your girl. And I just want to thank you all again, and thanks to everybody who stuck it out with us, and thanks to everybody who comes back and watches the replay. Okay, take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.